My father leaned across the crisp, white tablecloth of the Manhattan rooftop club, gesturing toward me with his gold-nibbed fountain pen, as if I were a line item he could not quite balance. "Do not mind Rachel," he said, his voice dripping with that sickening practice charm he saved for high-net-worth clients. "She is our permanent work in progress, still trying to find her footing in the real world." My brother, Eric, let out a sharp, jagged laugh that cut through the expensive air. "Yeah, we are still waiting for her to graduate from hobby to human. Have you ever felt like an invisible person in your own family? Please share your story down in the comments." I did not flinch, and I did not look for an apology in my father's eyes, because I already knew the account was empty. My heart did not race with hurt. Instead, it beat with the cold, rhythmic precision of a server clock. For years, I had been the silence in this room, a shadow they stepped over to admire their own reflections. But, as my father continued his monologue, painting me as a charity case to Taylor, I reached into my bag. Underneath the heavy linen tablecloth, hidden from the shimmering Manhattan skyline and their judgmental stares, my fingers moved across the screen of my phone with clinical accuracy. There was no trembling, there was only execution. I bypassed 3 layers of biometric security to enter the command center of Ether Systems. While my father, Gregory, was busy performing for Taylor, desperate to prove his firm was in her league, he had no idea that his entire empire was currently tethered to my thumb. I pulled up the file for Henderson Holdings. 2 years ago, when the markets dipped and his arrogance almost cost him everything, I was the one who stepped in. Not as his daughter, because that version of me had already been discarded, but as an anonymous institutional lender. I had been the silent investor in their version of family, footing the bill for their delusions of grandeur for 48 months straight. I scrolled to the pending request for the 90-day bridge loan extension. It was worth $15 million. Without it, the interest on their accumulated debt would trigger a margin call by dawn. Gregory was laughing now, telling a joke about people who think they can disrupt industries from a laptop in a bedroom. I did not ask why he hated me, and I did not cry about the years of being erased. I simply clicked Deny Extension. The screen glowed with a soft blue finality. Request for extension declined. Final notice issued. I added a mandatory flag for full repayment of the principal within 24 hours. Anger was not loud this time. It was an accounting entry. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and tonight I was closing the account. I looked up from the table and caught Taylor's gaze. She was watching me with a sharp, predatory curiosity, her fork suspended in midair. She sensed the shift in the room, even if my family was too blinded by their own noise to feel the ground falling away. My father raised his glass for a toast to success and legacy. I raised my water glass and took a slow, methodical sip. Inside my bag, my phone vibrated with the first automated alert from the bank. The collapse of Henderson Holdings had officially begun. It was not a breakdown. It was a balance sheet, and they were finally in the red. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, the heavy scent of vintage Bordeaux in the air clashing with the phantom smell of my old life, burnt circuits and stale espresso. For 1,460 days, I lived in a 12 by 12 foot box in a part of the city my father would not even drive through. To Gregory and Patricia, that drafty studio was proof I had failed to launch, a visual confirmation of my perceived mediocrity. They saw my thrift store sweaters and the dark circles under my eyes as the uniform of a loser, not the battle scars of a founder building a supply chain empire from nothing. The world often mistakes silence for weakness and camouflaged survival for a lack of ambition. In that studio, I was not just a girl struggling to pay rent. I was an inmate in a house of mirrors they built for me. I had been trained, by 20 years of their neglect, to accept the role of the spare, the invisible one who existed only to make Eric look like the golden child. It was an invisible chain I carried, a psychological shackle, made of every birthday they forgot, and every gala I was not invited to. I lived in a prison without bars, a space where my value was dictated by their noise and my successes were dismissed as hobbies. But while they were playing tennis and bragging about five-figure commissions, I was on 4 a.m. calls with developers in Zurich. While they were busy curating a glossy image for Manhattan's elite, I was engineering an artificial intelligence-driven network currently being bid on by 3 major shipping conglomerates. I was the silent architect of their survival, secretly funneling money through anonymous funds to keep their failing firm from a total collapse, while they laughed at my computer thing over dinner. I did not stay quiet because I was afraid of their judgment. I stayed quiet because I was busy. I was investing in the only currency that matters in this city, leverage. Every snide comment Gregory made was just another line item in a long-term strategy of emotional and financial divestment. I realized long ago that family affection was a subscription I was no longer willing to pay for. Now, sitting under the crystal chandeliers of the rooftop club, the air feels thin, but my vision has never been clearer. The invisible chain has not broken, it has simply changed hands. I am no longer the victim of their narrative, I am the lead author of their reckoning. Gregory thinks he is toasting to his legacy, but he is actually delivering the eulogy for his own empire. I have survived the silence, and now it is time for my reality to scream. Eric reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke blazer, pulling out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He slid it across the white linen with a flourish, the paper coming to rest right next to my water glass. "There is $1,200 in there," he said, his voice carrying just enough to ensure the surrounding tables could hear his charity. "Go buy a dress that does not look like it came from a donation bin. I want you to look presentable for the wedding." First impressions matter, and Taylor's family has a reputation to uphold. My mother, Patricia, smiled at me, that thin, practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "He is right, Rachel. You really should take this as a sign to get serious. This computer hobby of yours, it has been 4 years. You are 29 years old. It is time to stop playing at business and find a nice, stable man to take care of you. Someone who can pay your bills so you can stop this nonsense before you embarrass us any further." I stared at the envelope. It was fascinating, really. In their world, this was an act of extreme benevolence. They did not think they were being cruel. They thought they were being helpful. This is the trap of cruel normalization. To my family, I was not a person with my own dreams or a career. I was a defective piece of their brand. They had spent 2 decades convincing themselves that my failure was a fact, and my silence was proof of my inadequacy. They normalized my marginalization so thoroughly that they could insult my entire life's work over a 5-star meal without skipping a beat. They saw me as an object to be managed, a line item that needed to be moved off the balance sheet. "Actually," my father added, leaning back as the waiter refilled his wine, "I have talked to the board. We can get you a spot as an entry-level clerk, data entry. It will get you out of that dusty apartment and into a professional environment. You can start Monday. Consider it a fresh start." I felt the weight of their expectations, a heavy, suffocating blanket of good intentions that was really just a cage. They wanted to curate me, to tuck me away in a corner of their firm where I could not smudge the glossy image they sold to the world. They were offering me a $1,200 dress and a dead-end job, while I was sitting on a digital empire worth $85 million. I did not argue. I did not tell them that my computer thing was currently the backbone of a global logistics network. I did not mention that the $15 million bridge loan they were counting on had just been vaporized by my thumb. I simply picked up the envelope, feeling the crispness of the cash inside. "Thanks, Eric," I said, my voice as cold and smooth as the marble floor beneath us. "I will make sure to get something that makes a real statement." I saw Taylor's eyes narrow. She was looking at the way I held the envelope, not with gratitude, but with the detached interest of someone examining a relic. The silence at the table was about to be broken, but not by my voice. It was about to be broken by the reality of the numbers they had ignored for far too long. Taylor put her fork down. The metal clinked against the expensive porcelain, with a sharpness that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence of our private alcove. She had not touched her wine in 10 minutes. Her eyes, which had been scanning the room with the practiced detachment of a venture capital shark, were now locked onto mine with a terrifying intensity. Ether systems, Taylor said, her voice dropping into a register that was purely professional. You mentioned that name earlier. What exactly is your burn rate, Rachel? And what market gap is your platform addressing in the decentralized logistics space? My father let out a booming, condescending laugh, reaching over to pat Taylor's hand as if she had just told a charming joke. Burn rate? Honey, Rachel is not in the energy business. She is just tinkering with some apps, probably uses more electricity than she generates in revenue. Do not waste your professional brain on her hobby. Eric joined in, his smirk widening. Yeah, Taylor, do not grill her. She is not in our league. You work with actual founders, unicorns. Rachel is just playing around with code until she finds a husband to pay her bills. She would not know a Series B from a grocery list. Taylor did not laugh. She did not even look at them. She kept her gaze on me, her brow furrowing as she connected pieces of a puzzle my family did not even know existed. They are trying to lead your Series B, are they not? The consortium in Zurich. I have heard rumors of a ghost founder in Chicago who has been blocking every major firm in the valley for 8 months straight. The air at the table turned heavy, the arrogance of my father and brother suddenly clashing with the cold reality of Taylor's questions. They did not know what a burn rate was. They knew how to sell portfolios and brag about country club memberships, but they were illiterate in the language of the future I had been building. To them, business was noise and perception. To me, it was data and leverage. We just hope she finds a nice, stable man soon, my mother sighed, looking at me with a performative pity that made my skin crawl. Someone to take care of the overhead so she can stop this nonsense. The dam was about to break. I looked toward the entrance of the rooftop club. Right on cue, a man in a sharp, charcoal suit stepped past the maitre d'. He was not a member, but he carried himself with the kind of authority that made the staff step aside without a word. He was my lead counsel, and in his hand was a thick, blood-red folder. He walked straight to our table, ignoring the confused stares of my parents. He did not look at the Manhattan skyline. He looked only at me. He placed the red folder directly on top of the cream-colored envelope Eric had thrown onto the table earlier. The contrast was perfect. $1,200 of charity buried under the weight of a hostile takeover. The audit is complete, Miss Vance, he said, his voice level and clinical. We have successfully acquired the final tranches of the distressed debt from Henderson Holdings. You are now the primary lien holder for the firm's Manhattan headquarters and their primary operating accounts. The default notice is ready for your signature. My father's face drained of color. He looked from the lawyer to the red folder, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Eric's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. They were no longer in control of the narrative. The silence that followed was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. The silence was not just quiet. It was the sound of a legacy evaporating. Taylor slowly stood up, her chair scraping against the floor, with a sound that seemed to shatter the very foundations of my father's world. She did not look at my mother or the stack of cash of $1,200 Eric had tossed like scraps. She looked at me, her eyes wider than I had ever seen them, filled with a mixture of professional awe and genuine terror. C.V. Vance, Taylor whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. Your initials. C.V., Rachel, Catherine, Vance. My firm has spent 8 months trying to get past your legal firewall. We have a standing offer to lead your Series B, but your team would not even give us a return phone call. You are the ghost founder everyone in the valley has been chasing. My father let out a dry, rattling laugh, his eyes darting between us. Taylor, honey, you are confused. Vance is just our last name. This is Rachel. She is. She is the one we were telling you about, the work in progress, the one who needs the internship. Taylor ignored him entirely. She pulled a tablet from her bag and slammed it onto the table right next to the red folder. The screen glowed with the stark blue header of a Bloomberg exclusive. The headline screamed in bold, black letters, "The Invisible Unicorn: How Ether Systems Became an $85 million Disruptor in Silicon Silence." There was no photo of me, just the sleek, geometric logo of Ether Systems. But the name C.V. Vance was highlighted in the very first paragraph as the sole founder and controlling interest. Taylor pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "This is her, Gregory? This is the little project you were mocking? My firm's internal valuation of this company is $85 million. And that was before she closed the most recent funding round." I watched the color drain from my father's face until he looked like a wax figure melting under the intense heat of the truth. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air in a dried-up pond. Eric looked from the screen to me, his expression fracturing into a mess of shock, jealousy, and absolute horror. The insults they had hurled all evening charity case, failure, waste of potential, now hung in the air like toxic waste, ridiculous and radioactive. They were not just wrong, they were statistically irrelevant. For 22 years, they had measured me by their yardstick, never realizing that I had built my own. I did not know," my father stammered, his hand reaching out toward the red folder as if it were a live wire. "No," Taylor said, her voice turning ice cold as she turned toward her fiancé. "You did not know because you never bothered to ask. You were too busy listening to your own voice to notice that your sister was the one keeping your lights on. You have been insulting the person who owns your debt." The irony was so thick I could taste it. My family had spent the night treating me like a burden, never suspecting that they were the ones being carried. I was not the project. I was the architect of their survival. And they had just spent 3 hours insulting the person who held the power to seize their Manhattan headquarters. I did not yell. I simply picked up the cream-colored envelope Eric had thrown at me and placed it back on his side of the table, right on top of his expensive, untouched steak. "Keep your $1,200, Eric," I said, my voice steady and devoid of heat. "You are going to need it more than I do. In fact, you are going to need it to pay for your next month of electricity." I turned to my father, who was still staring at the Bloomberg headline like it was a death warrant. "And Dad, you have got the bill tonight, right? After all, you told me to save my pennies for rent." I watched him look down at the leather folder for the rooftop club. I knew the total would be over $3,000. I also knew that the black credit card he was so proud of was attached to the accounts I had just frozen under the table. This was not revenge, it was accounting. Taylor turned toward Eric, her face a mask of cold professionalism. "The wedding is off," she said, her voice cutting through the heavy Manhattan air like a blade. I was marrying into what I thought was a family of visionaries. Instead, I find a group of people so blinded by their own arrogance that they could not see the most successful person in the room was sitting right in front of them. "Eric, your stupidity is not just an emotional embarrassment, it is a professional liability. My firm will be issuing a formal statement on Monday regarding the termination of our relationship with Henderson Holdings." Eric reached for her hand, his eyes red and pleading. "Taylor, please, we can talk about this. She is just my sister. She is." "She is your primary creditor," Taylor snapped, pulling her hand away with a look of pure disgust. "And she is the only reason you have had a home to live in for the last 2 years. I stood up, smoothing the front of the dress I had bought with my own money that could buy this entire building. "For 48 months, I have been the anonymous institutional lender keeping your firm afloat," I said, looking at my parents as they shrunk into their seats. "I paid the property taxes you could not afford. I covered the insurance on the lake house you used for the parties you did not invite me to. I did it because I thought a part of you might change. I was wrong. My compassion had been a luxury they had consistently overdrafted, and as of 5 minutes ago, The line of credit was permanently closed. There would be no more secret transfers, no more bailouts. You wanted me to be a work in progress? I asked, my voice echoing in the sudden quiet of the club. Well, the project is finished, and you are not part of the final version. My mother began to sob, a loud, theatrical sound that no longer had any power over me. Gregory just sat there, staring at the red folder my lawyer had delivered, looking like a man who had finally realized he was standing on a foundation made of someone else's mercy. I did not feel triumph. Instead, I felt an immense, quiet weight lifting from my chest. I had spent 22 years trying to fit into their world, never realizing I was the one holding it up. It was a pleasure to meet you, Taylor, I said warmly, ignoring the wreckage of my former family. Have your people call my assistant on Monday. We can discuss the acquisition of your distressed assets. I did not wait for an answer, and I did not look back. I walked out of the private alcove and through the dining room, the silence behind me more beautiful than any apology they could ever give. The cool Manhattan night air hit my face, sharp and cleansing, washing away the scent of aged oak and arrogance that had clung to my skin during that 3-hour ordeal. I did not look back as I reached the curb, my steps steady and rhythmic on the pavement. A car was already waiting for me, the door held open by a driver who did not care about my thrift store sweaters or my computer hobby. As the heavy door clicked shut, the frantic noise of the city outside was replaced by a profound silence, the kind of silence that only follows the total collapse of a hierarchy. I pulled out my phone one last time, but I did not open my logistics software or check the market tranches. I opened my contacts. One by one, I performed a clinical liquidation of my past, Gregory, Patricia, Eric. Their names disappeared into the digital void with a single swipe, just like the financial security I had provided them for 48 months straight. This was not a moment of heartbreak or a breakdown, it was a necessary divestment. I was finally removing the toxic assets from my life, and for the first time in 22 years, my internal balance sheet was perfectly clear. As the car moved toward the financial district, I looked out at the lights of the skyline and thought about the people I had just left behind. It was a perfect illustration of the illusion of power held by an empty wallet. My family had spent decades confusing the act of having with the act of being. They believed that their designer labels, their elite club memberships, and their loud monologues gave them an inherent right to rule over me, never realizing that their entire position was nothing more than a fragile, hollow shell. Their authority was merely rented with money they did not actually have. And the second I stopped footing the bill, they were exposed for what they truly were, people with no internal value to keep them standing. They did not just lose a daughter and a sister tonight. They lost the only thing that kept their delusions of grandeur alive in a world made of mirrors. The car came to a halt in front of the World Trade Center. I took the express elevator to the top floor, entering the new, expansive headquarters of Ether Systems. The office was still smelling of fresh paint and incredible possibility. I walked past the empty workstations and the humming server racks to the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching as the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon over the Atlantic. Inside the room, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of cold facts, rising numbers, and the quiet retribution of a life lived well on my own terms. I sat at my desk, looking out at the city I now helped move. For 27 years, I had been the spare, the work in progress, the invisible girl who was always in the way. But as the sun rose over Manhattan, I realized that the project was not just finished, it was legendary. I leaned back into my chair and breathed in the stillness. It was not the silence of being ignored anymore. It was the absolute, unshakable silence of sovereignty. I was finally, irrevocably free. If you believe that justice will eventually be served, please hit like and subscribe now. Do not let anyone define your value. Please share this video to spread power to those fighting in silence.